Hey, I'm Andrew with 10-Minute Therapy, and in today's video we're going to continue our look at depression by examining something that we've looked at previously on the topic of cognitive distortions when we were examining anxiety, and understand how cognitive distortions in the case of depression might lead to what we call negative thinking loops. So, without further ado, we'll start the clock. We'll get right into it. So in our last couple of videos, we've been examining depression and trying our best to understand what is depression exactly. Where does clinical depression start and grief and life experience end? How do we combat depression through various aspects of living, through healthy sleep, exercise, socialization, even volunteer work? And in our last video, we really examined that one of the really tricky and difficult parts of depression is this topic and idea of hopelessness, that without hope, without that thing to move towards and to try to grab hold of, we might struggle to break out of depression. And therefore, hope becomes very important for us as we function as human beings. But another aspect of depression that we have to look at is the cognitive portion. Now, in some previous videos that you can look on our page for, we examined what we called cognitive distortions. Simply put, cognitive distortions are something that are not diagnostic. They're something we all do as human beings. We engage in cognitive distortions on occasions. Cognitive distortions are actually just faulty thinking. And the problem is with faulty thinking, we can fall into loops of faulty thinking that become very difficult to get out of. And so in today's video, what we want to examine is how in depression, some of these distortions can rear their head and cause great difficulty for us and for the individual that you may know that wrestles with depression. And so a good example of a negative thinking loop that someone might get into who's already maybe wrestling with some depression might be, if we take the example of someone who, makes a mistake at work and maybe they get called out on it by a boss, a supervisor, a manager, a superior of some sort. And so they make this mistake, they get called out on it, and this thought starts in their head, this process that says, man, I messed up. I'm such a failure. And that thought process that starts something simple in concepts like I'm a failure can evolve into this much bigger and more complex thought process. Not only am I a failure, but I'm never going to succeed. Everything I have is going to fall apart. And when we begin to spiral, right? I wonder, as you're listening to this, have you ever had a time in your life where something started as a simple negative thought and spiraled very quickly into something far more catastrophic in your thinking? And this is a good example of what we would call a negative thought loop, because the more we engage in this loop, the more it sort of becomes self-sufficient. It keeps sort of re-energizing itself. This loop doesn't go away and we just spiral and spiral. And these are the kinds of things that even in depression we see through this cognitive behavioral therapy lens, that negative thought loops can wreak havoc on our mental health and well-being. And I want to give you just a couple examples of some of these negative thought loops that we might fall into. But before we do, let me remind you of something we discussed in a previous video about how our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors are all interconnected. And so this image right here, we call this the cognitive triangle. And in the cognitive triangle, we have thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And the three are interconnected. In fact, the arrows in this triangle can go any direction. But what we're going to look at today is how a negative thought loop, something that starts with thought, leads to more negative emotion, leads to negative behavior, and reinforces the negative thought. I mean, this is something that happens to us all, but certainly in depression, we see this quite often. A good example that we'll start with here today as we examine negative thought loops would be all or nothing thinking. All or nothing. It's this thought that says, if I'm not a success, then I must be a failure. If I'm not excellent at everything I do, I'm terrible at everything I do. I either completely succeed or I fall irreparably behind. It's all or nothing in this sort of thinking. Now, logically, when we step back, we say, okay, well, that's not true, right? There might be a whole spectrum of success, and just because I'm not at the top doesn't mean I'm at the very bottom. That's very illogical. But here again, these logical fallacies and these cognitive distortions that we discuss, they don't follow patterns of logic, right? That's why they're safe to refer to as logical fallacies. But in the moment, they stir up deep emotion within us. So in an all or nothing thinking, here again, if I'm the person at work that makes a mistake, and now I believe I am a complete failure, to sit in that thought, I'm a failure, I'm a failure, I'm a failure, is going to stir up pretty negative, hopeless emotion. And that's going to lead to negative outcomes and behaviors, because if I believe I'm a failure, what is that going to do to my choices and my behaviors every day? Am I going to show up to work and put in my best effort if I believe I'm a failure? Probably not. I'm probably going to start to check out a little bit. I might even sabotage what I do at work, which is going to reinforce the thought, I'm a failure. This is what I do. This is how I live. And so it's really important that we understand that in all or nothing thinking, we can fall dangerously into this place of hopelessness. It's going to dig up a deep well of negative emotion and ultimately negative outcomes in our behaviors. Another example of a negative thought loop might be what we call overgeneralization. Overgeneralization, or sometimes people just refer to it as generalization. And we know what that term means. It means we take one shred of evidence and we generalize it to a much bigger population, even though we know that when you're collecting data scientifically, that would be a really unhealthy way to go about collecting data. We wouldn't take one shred of data and say this applies to all data. That's a really illogical way to approach it. But we do this in our thinking, right? We'll use the same example. I make a mistake at work, and now I overgeneralize it, and I say to myself, I always make mistakes. It's like, well, hold up. How did we go from I made one mistake to I always make mistakes? Well, I took that one example and I overgeneralized it to the whole of my life, right? I make a mistake at work, and it's like, I always mess up. I'm messing up at home. I'm messing up in my marriage. I'm messing up in my parenting. I'm messing up at work. Everywhere I go, I mess up. Right? Well, if I believe that and I let that thought stay with me, all I do is mess up. Again, negative emotion is going to follow that. I'm going to feel hopeless. I'm going to feel lost. I'm going to feel frustrated, maybe even angry, sad. That's going to lead to negative outcomes in my behaviors and in my choices. Inevitably, I'm going to start to make choices that fulfill, and I become a self-fulfilling prophecy that fulfill that negative thought loop. And so around and around we go. And now my negative behaviors reinforce this generalization that I've determined that I always mess up. And these are just simple examples I'm throwing at you, but they can take many different forms. The all or nothing thinking, the generalization and overgeneralizing. Another cognitive distortion that we talked about in our video, one of the two that we made on cognitive distortions, is mind reading. And if you remember, mind reading is this cognitive distortion that says that it's as if we pretend I have the ability to read someone's mind. Now, I know that's not true logically, and we know that's not true of anyone in this world. No one has the ability to read someone else's thoughts. But we do this thing where we engage in thinking as if we have the ability to read others' thoughts. So we might say something like, man, I know these people think that I'm just the worst. Here again, we'll use the same example. I make a mistake at work and I start to engage in mind reading. My boss thinks I'm a failure. My supervisor thinks I'm worthless. I just know that I know they're going to fire me because they think I'm the worst. Very quickly, we've gone from I made a simple mistake to now I'm assuming what someone else is thinking about me, and not in a positive way. And so if I stay in this thought loop, this negative thought loop starts to take form. My boss hates me. He thinks I'm the worst. He's going to fire me. I just know it. Ultimately, where does that lead in my emotions? But anxiety, worry, fear, and hopelessness. Because how powerful can I be to change how someone else thinks of me? I am hopeless in this. And so inevitably, that's going to lead to a lot of erratic behaviors. If I'm living in that fear place, my erratic behaviors, at the very least, my mind and emotions are consumed with this thought. So how am I ever going to engage in changing that? And this is all really similar to one cognitive distortion we mentioned in one of our other videos, catastrophizing. Catastrophizing, where we spiral out. We take that one thing, I made a mistake, and very quickly I could make it into a catastrophe. My boss hates me. I'm going to get fired. I'm not going to be able to support my family. All of these things happen so quickly in my mind, all because of a mistake. And it reinforces negative emotion, which reinforces negative behavior, and around we go. And so hopefully you see and understand what we're saying here. Negative loops of thought are detrimental to our mental and emotional health. So with our last minute, let's answer this question. What do we do about that? Practically, if we can accept this concept of a negative thought loop, how do I break it? Step one, we have got to have awareness. I have to be aware of the fact that these things are happening. I have to notice it in real time. When that thought creeps in that says, well, if I'm not a success, I'm a complete failure because I made this mistake. I have to be able to go, whoa, there it is. There's that logical fallacy again. There's that cognitive distortion. There's that all or nothing thinking. Or if I spiral out and catastrophize into these worst case scenarios, I have to be able to have an awareness of it and catch it and go, there it is again. There's that catastrophizing that I do sometimes. So awareness is step one, without a doubt, because I can't fix that of which I don't see and I don't have an awareness. Step two, why don't we question that thought? How come we don't do that? How come when we engage in negative loops of thinking, we never stop and go, is that true? Like if a friend or a loved one came to you and explained all these thoughts they had, I am a complete failure and my boss is going to fire me all because I made this mistake and I know they're thinking it. Would you not stop and say to that friend, is that really true? Like, do you really believe all this? Do you hear yourself? Of course you would. You would ask these good questions of a loved one. So why don't we do it of ourselves? In reality, that's step two. I have to have an awareness of it. And step two, I have to question it. I have to question that thought. Is that thought true? Is that real? Or am I spiraling out in my mind again and making these things up? Regardless of what the distortion is, I have to question it. And step three, I need to hold evidence up to it. So when in my mind I spiral out because I believe I'm a failure, I can say, is that real? Is it? And then in step three, hold up evidence and say, well, the evidence says I'm actually pretty good at my job. I've actually been pretty successful at my job. People do seem to like me. My boss has been pretty supportive of me. The evidence actually speaks in contrary to the negative thought loop. But here again, it requires something of me. I have to have an awareness of it. I have to question it, and I have to be willing to examine other evidence and hold evidence up to this negative thought loop and say, maybe it's not real. And step four, we have to learn how to reframe. And so in our next video, we're going to pause here. And in our next video, we're actually examine how do we reframe our thinking. Like in our next video, we're going to pick up these steps: awareness, questioning, evidence gathering, and reframing. And we're going to start to put that into practice with a couple of really practical examples. So if you walk away with anything today, number one, if you or someone you love is wrestling with depression, as I say each time, talk to a professional who can help walk you through this step by step and go through these things with you. But number two, if you notice any of these negative thought loops in your thinking or in someone that you love and care for, start to help them ask these questions. Is this real? Do you really believe this? Does the evidence seem to match what you're saying? And if we can start to shed the light of truth onto the lies that we believe in these negative thought loops, we have a great chance of breaking free from negative loops of thought. So join us next time. We'll engage in some practical steps and in some reframing through some really practical examples. But in the meantime, I'm Andrew with 10 Minute Therapy. God bless.